Squirrel Killer here. Welcome to the second episode of the ThaumicRotation's developer's commentary. We're here in a creative test world, and today we're going to talk a bit about something that was brought up, and we're going to see if we can think about what's going on with a bit of a quote-unquote problem with the pack. So that is iron cost of rotary craft. Escapee, one of the members of the little Strifecraft community, popped in and he was playing a bit and he said we needed an increase in iron spawn because it seemed like there just wasn't enough iron, even though he was mining, going through stacks of iron just to get a basic ore processing setup going. And I was like, well, I've never had that problem with rotary craft in previous playthroughs. I haven't gone far enough in this one to see if that's an issue, and I was trying to think why that would be. Well, rotary craft, first of all, is not an early game mod. It's definitely a mid-game mod. It puts tech into mid-game, and as a result of the way this pack's designed, this pack is incredibly iron heavy. Insanely. Rotary craft almost exclusively uses iron for the most part. We have Thaumicraft, which uses a fair amount of iron whenever it needs metals, iron and gold. My cat's trying to get onto the table that the microphone sits on. We have Pneumaticraft, which uses a lot of iron, and we have Steve's Carts, which uses a lot of iron. So I need to think about iron costs for sure, right then and there. Now then, the other thing that needs to be considered is do I want the progression to start off with rotary craft? Well, you also have Thaumicraft, and I really feel you should not be starting with rotary craft because Thaumicraft has a late early game or early mid game type ore doubling system here, with the Inferno Furnace being used to smelt and this being used to double. That is very, very effective and would really help you get going with your iron costs until you can get going with something like this, which this is not the setup you would be using for something like rotary craft in a survival situation because you would have access to the bedrock stuff. So this, while it's an option, is not what you would typically be using. Most of the time what you're handling is actually trying to turn speed into torque, to be honest. Most machines are demanding torque requirements, not speed requirements, so that's one thing I have to consider, but I'm getting distracted for a moment. So what we have here is relatively early game setup where I've just swapped out the normal shafts and gearboxes that you would normally be using, which would probably be steel at this point, and I've replaced them for our current purposes in a test world with bedrock. But it doesn't actually change much of the actual blocks that are needed, just you'd be using a lower tier. And looking at all this setup probably going to take a player, 2, maybe 3 stacks of iron. No small amount. We're talking well over 100 iron there. Nearly 200 iron, possibly. So that does mean I have to think about, well, what do I want the progression to be? Do I want players starting off with tech? Tech is where most of the iron cost is. There's actually very little iron cost in the magic portion of the pack. Witchery is a bit iron heavy, but it does offer ways to get iron as well. Like you can use the ore transposition ritual to you. to get it, bring it to you, and stuff like that. So that's a thing. But it does really show that players are going to need to get auto mining going. I have to move my cat again. And so, do I want players going through here? Well, in a mod pack, the way I view progression in mod packs is there's actually two sets of progression. There is explicit progression, which is the progression that you outright say, this is the progression of the pack. An example of explicit progression, by the way, would be take a look at a mod pack such as FTB Infinity Evolved Expert Mode, where you need to craft one thing to craft another thing. There's no way around it. You must craft A to get B to get C to get D. There's no way to, you have to follow progression. There's no way that you can skip a stage in a progression, because those are actually like a machine required to craft a component for another machine. On the other hand, in something like this, while the mods individually have their own explicit progressions, there's also an implied progression. An implied progression, not impression, progression. Implied progression is the idea that, well, you don't have to do one thing to get to another. For example, if thermal expansion was in here, well, you wouldn't have to make a pulverizer to get double the ores to get going with enough iron to do rotary craft. It would be expected that you would probably take that route. Or if there is which would be more likely to be found in more packs, well, it's not required that you use a mod such as Tinker's Construct to double your ore with the smeltery. It's generally expected you would, so if you don't have enough iron because you're just mining and smelting it directly into ingots, you should have been using your smeltery to double. Now, there's not the option of a super early game doubling mechanic in this. In fact, as far as tech goes, the first thing you have is tripling, and it's this grinder, and it requires all this, which is nearly 200 iron to get going with, as I said before. Approximately, in a real survival scenario, the setup would be slightly larger, I believe. So what does that mean? Well, it's actually quite simple. It means that you can't start with this. You need to go to something that requires less iron. For example, there's the Ars Magica ore doubling methods, but there's also the ore doubling methods of ThaumicRotation, which this is a creative setup, as you can see, but what we would do is we would take a piece of iron ore, and that would give us a native ore cluster. That native ore cluster gets tossed into here, and it gets spit out here, and there's a small chance that you get an iron nugget or two. So this is a good way to get going with your iron early game. And then you would use that, and this wouldn't require too much iron to get going, and you would use this setup to get running with this. And there's the implied progression of going through ThaumicRotation to get going with resources enough to get going with rotary craft. ThaumicRotation, well, you might need to seem to invest a lot of time into it, will act as a powerful stepping stone to get into rotary craft. Plus, ThaumicRotation offers much of the automation options in the pack, meaning it is worth your while to get started with it early so that it can help you with rotary craft later on. Now, of course, there's the Ars Magica Cal Factor, which can double ores if I'm not mistaken. And I believe there's actually some other way to double ores in this, though I'm not sure what it is. And of course, rotary craft gets going with its very efficient. I believe I saw one other way when I was designing the pack that could do it. Or maybe it was a mod I looked at and decided not to, but Ars Magica can also double ores. I believe it can even triple them. But all of this can be used to get going with a grinder, which you can then use to get going with other things, and so on and so forth. And that's the important thing to remember. You're not just trying to get going with one mod. You need to think about all the mods, because the implied progression of the pack is Ars Magica or Thaumcraft into Rotary Craft, not Rotary Craft into the others. While that might seem more efficient because you could triple ores, making it far easier to get going, it might not be in reality. It's resources versus time. This might actually take less time to get going with a setup in, assuming you have the resources, but costs much more resources, meaning if you don't score on the resources, you're going to suffer. On the other hand, Thaumcraft takes more time, but it actually takes significantly less resources to get the doubling going, assuming you target the doubling mechanics. And that's just the kind of stuff that needs to be considered when designing this stuff, when building up towards it, and so on. So, well, it was asked I increase iron spawns. For now, I'm going to say no, there's no need to. You have ways to get enough, you have ways to stretch out your iron, or you just got to be a bit more clever with it. Other things that have happened in the recent updates, which I'd like to discuss, is the idea that I have actually forgotten many mods that I wanted early on in the pack. Like, they were intended to be in the first version of the pack, in 0.1.0. I've just finished preparing, and I have to push out and upload the next update, which is just checking to make sure no one's on that server, which is 0.1.5 will be the one that's going up. 0.1.4 is up. So, and on the server, but I might do another update today just to get some more things out there, and that would actually increase the iron cost, but it would give us hopper ducks, which I believe people would like. It also gives round robin hoppers, which might help people in some kind of automation capacity. So that's just some of the stuff that needs to be considered when building a pack and designing its progression. Maybe because this pack isn't about a preset progression so much as an implied progression, which, am I leaving the stepping stones for a player to find their way into something? So far, I think yes. Yeah, I am. After all, this pack leaves a lot up to the player to figure out how they're going to do things. Maybe I'll tweak iron a bit. I could increase iron spawn rates by like 20% or something. I don't know. I don't think I will yet, though. Need a bit more testing in that regard. Plus, it puts a bit of an emphasis on auto mining. You're going to need a lot of ores. Better get running those bores. That rhymed. It was unintended, but it rhymed. The two auto mining methods in this, or the two dedicated auto mining methods, are the bore from Rotorcraft and the arcane tunnel bore from Thaumcraft. So yeah. Anyways, I thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.